I am 65 years old now. My name is Priscilia. When people look at me, they see a calm old woman with soft grey hair, gentle eyes, and a quiet smile. What they don't see is the moment my entire 43-year marriage almost shattered on a day that was supposed to be about gratitude, love, and family. It happened at my husband's retirement dinner. The room was full of people, our children sat across from us, friends laughed, glasses clinked. Then my husband Daniel stood up to give a speech. His hands were shaking. At first I thought it was emotion. But then he said words that cut me deeper than any knife ever could. "I need to confess something," he said, his voice breaking. "There was a time I almost destroyed my marriage because I believed a lie told by someone very close to us." The room went silent. My heart dropped into my stomach. I felt everyone's eyes turn toward me, some curious, some confused, some judging. I had no idea what he was talking about, but I knew in that moment that whatever he was about to say would expose a wound I had buried for decades. I forced a smile and reached for his hand. Inside I was shaking. As he spoke, my mind rushed backward, all the way to the beginning, before the lie, before the pain, before I became the woman I am today. I didn't want to marry when I was young. I had grown up hearing nothing but bad stories. Women crying, homes full of shouting, men walking away. My own mother used to say, marriage will humble you in ways you're not ready for. So I was afraid. Then I met Daniel. He was kind in a way that felt rare. He listened. He laughed easily. When he spoke about the future, he included me in it, always we, never I. Still, fear followed me like a shadow. It was my grandmother who sat me down one evening, years before I married, and changed my life forever. She held my hands and said, "Child, marriage doesn't fail because of one big problem. It fails because of many small ones ignored." She taught me 7 things. I didn't know then that those 7 lessons would save my marriage, again and again. When Daniel proposed, I said yes. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I refused to let fear decide my life. The early years of our marriage were peaceful, not perfect but peaceful. We argued sometimes, we struggled financially. We learned each other's weaknesses, but there was respect, there was communication, there was love. We had 2 children, our pride, our joy. I thought we were building something unbreakable. That's when the first crack appeared. It came disguised as concern. Daniel's younger sister, Marlene, was always around. She was friendly, helpful, and always watching. She would pull Daniel aside and whisper things. I never asked what they talked about. I trusted my husband. One evening, I came home early from work and found Daniel sitting quietly in the living room, staring at nothing. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded too quickly. That night, he barely touched his food. For weeks after that, he changed. He became distant, short with his words, careful with his phone. He started coming home late, not drunk, not angry, just absent. I blamed myself. Maybe I talked too much. Maybe I didn't listen enough. Maybe I wasn't doing enough as a wife. This is where my grandmother's first lesson saved me. Peace starts with self-awareness. Instead of accusing him, I looked inward. I adjusted my tone. I chose my battles. I tried to communicate instead of staying silent. But something unseen was working against me. One night, Daniel finally exploded. "Why are you lying to me?" he shouted. I froze. About what? He stared at me like I was a stranger. About the man you've been seeing. I laughed at first, because the accusation was so ridiculous it didn't make sense. Then I saw his face. He wasn't joking. That was the first time my heart truly broke. I denied it. I cried. I begged him to tell me who said such a thing. He refused. "That doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is the truth." I felt helpless, betrayed, confused. A few minutes into this story, let me ask you something. Please comment where you are watching from. I want to know how far this story is reaching, and I want you to know you're not alone listening to it. That night, Daniel slept on the couch. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing something painful. You can do everything right and still be misunderstood. Days passed in silence, then weeks. What I didn't know then was that someone had been planting seeds of doubt, slowly, carefully, and intentionally. And the truth, the worst betrayal wasn't that my husband doubted me. It was who made him doubt me, and why. But I wouldn't discover that until years later, on the night of his retirement dinner, when his confession changed everything. The silence between Daniel and me grew heavy after that night. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, cold, and exhausting. The kind of silence that makes you question your own reflection in the mirror. Every morning I woke up before him. I made breakfast like always, eggs, toast, coffee. I set his plate down gently, hoping he would look at me and see the woman he married, not the stranger someone had painted in his mind. Most mornings he barely spoke. A nod, a short thank you. Then he left for work. I started feeling lonely inside my own marriage. Our children were still young then. I tried to protect them from the tension, smiling more than I felt, laughing louder than necessary. At night, when everyone slept, I cried quietly into my pillow so no one would hear. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? This is where my grandmother's second lesson echoed in my head: choose your battles wisely. I didn't argue, I didn't accuse, I didn't chase him with questions he wasn't ready to answer. Instead, I focused on peace, my peace. I reminded myself that respect is non-negotiable, even when your heart is hurting. But peace doesn't mean blindness. I began noticing things I had ignored before. Marlene's visits became more frequent. She always came when Daniel was home. She would sit close to him, speak softly, and glance at me as if measuring my reactions. If I entered the room, conversations stopped. One afternoon I overheard her say, "I'm just worried about you, that's all." Worried about what, I wondered. I tried to talk to her woman to woman. "Did I do something to offend you?" I asked gently one day while we washed dishes together. She smiled, too sweet. "Of course not, Priscilia, I just care about my brother." That smile stayed with me long after she left. Weeks later, Daniel came home with printed papers in his hand. My chest tightened. "What's that?" I asked. He hesitated. "Phone records." I felt dizzy. "Phone records for what?" "For the number you've been calling," he said, avoiding my eyes. I laughed again out of disbelief and fear. "Daniel. I don't even have time to sleep properly. Who would I be calling?" He slammed the papers on the table. "Then explain this." I looked. The number was unfamiliar. "That's not mine," I said firmly. He rubbed his forehead. "Marlene said." That was it. That was the moment everything clicked. "Marlene," I repeated. "Daniel, why is your sister tracking my phone calls?" He froze. That night, for the first time in weeks, we argued. Loudly, painfully, I demanded answers. He accused me of deflecting. Words were thrown like stones. I realized something devastating then. Someone had been feeding him information, false information, and he trusted it more than my tears. This was my lowest point. I felt humiliated, suspected, alone. There were days I thought about leaving, packing my bags, taking the children, starting over. But my grandmother's fifth lesson held me back: don't carry the marriage alone. I reached out to a close friend, to a counselor, to prayer. I started protecting my inner peace, lesson 6. I refused to let suspicion turn me bitter or cruel. Still, the distance remained. One evening, I walked into the living room and heard Daniel on the phone. "Yes," he said quietly, "I know, I'll look again." When he saw me, he hung up fast. "Who was that?" I asked. "Marlene," he said. I nodded slowly, my heart pounding. In that moment I knew the betrayal wasn't random, it was intentional. What I didn't know yet was why. Why would someone who smiled at my children, who ate at my table, who called me sister, want to tear my marriage apart? The answer was buried in jealousy, insecurity, and a truth so ugly it would take decades to surface. But back then all I knew was this: love is a daily decision. And every day I was choosing to love, even when it hurt. That choice would save me. But it would also cost me something precious, before the truth finally came out. Before I continue, let me ask you, what would you have done if your spouse believed someone else over you? Have you ever seen a family member quietly destroy a relationship from the inside? Share your thoughts in the comments, I'm reading them. The years that followed taught me how quiet pain can be. From the outside, our family looked whole. Daniel and I still attended events together. We still raised our children with love. We still prayed before meals. But inside our home, something fragile had cracked and never fully healed. Daniel never accused me again out loud, yet the doubt stayed between us like an unspoken guest. He asked fewer questions about my day. He guarded his thoughts. Trust, once broken, does not always shatter loudly. Sometimes it erodes slowly. Marlene remained present, always helpful, always concerned. She volunteered to babysit. She offered advice I never asked for. And every time Daniel and I had even the smallest disagreement, she seemed to know about it before I finished processing my feelings. I stopped confronting her. I realized she thrived on reactions. Instead, I focused on my children and my inner peace. I returned to my grandmother's words, "Protect your inner peace." I built small routines that grounded me, early morning walks, journaling, quiet prayers whispered while everyone slept. Still, the manipulation continued. One afternoon, a friend pulled me aside after church. Her voice was low and careful. "Priscilia, I don't want to hurt you, but I thought you should know. I've heard things." My stomach tightened. "What things?" She hesitated. "That you were emotionally distant from Daniel, that you made him feel small, that you were too focused on yourself." I felt my chest burn. None of it was true, yet the words sounded familiar, like echoes of things Marlene once said. That night, I finally did something I had avoided for years. I checked Daniel's old emails on our shared computer. I wasn't looking for betrayal, I was looking for understanding. What I found changed how I saw everything. There were messages from Marlene, long, emotional emails filled with concern and fear. She spoke about me in careful sentences, never directly accusing, always suggesting. "She's under a lot of stress. I'm worried she's not being honest with you. I just don't want you to get hurt." Each message planted doubt while pretending to offer protection. I sat there shaking. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was manipulation. I printed the emails and hid them in a folder. I wasn't ready to confront anyone yet. I needed clarity. I needed strength. Weeks later, Daniel came home upset. His promotion had been delayed. "She thinks it's because of you," he said quietly. "Who?" I asked, though I already knew. "Marlene," he replied. "She said your behavior might reflect poorly on me." That was my breaking point. I looked at the man I had loved for decades and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, but resolve. "Daniel," I said calmly, "do you trust me?" He didn't answer right away. That pause hurt more than any accusation ever could. "I need time," he finally said. That night I slept alone again. But this time I wasn't crying. I was thinking. I realized I had spent years trying to prove my innocence instead of demanding truth. I had chosen peace, but peace without boundaries becomes silence. I began gathering everything. Emails, dates, patterns, conversations. I wrote them down carefully, like assembling pieces of a puzzle. Then life pulled us forward. The children grew up, careers advanced, time passed. The tension faded into routine, but the wound remained. Until the night of Daniel's retirement dinner. When he stood up with shaking hands, I didn't know yet that he had discovered the same emails. That he had finally confronted Marlene. That she had confessed, not out of remorse but exhaustion. She admitted she had always been jealous. Jealous of our marriage. Jealous of my place in Daniel's life. Jealous that he listened to me before her. She thought if she created enough doubt, she could pull him closer to herself. That truth hit me all at once as Daniel spoke at the podium. But just before he revealed her name, he paused and looked directly at me. His eyes filled with tears. And I knew something else was coming. Something I wasn't ready for. Before I continue, let me ask you. Have you ever trusted someone who later turned out to be quietly working against you? What would you have done if the betrayal came from inside your own family? Share your thoughts in the comments. Daniel's voice shook as he stood there holding the microphone. The room was silent, but inside me everything was loud. My heart was pounding. My hands were cold. I felt like that younger version of myself again, the woman sitting on the edge of her bed years ago, wondering why her husband no longer looked at her the same way. "I believed a lie," Daniel said, "and because of that I hurt the woman who never once betrayed me." Gasps rippled through the room. Our children stared at him in shock. Friends exchanged confused glances. I sat frozen, my fingers clenched tightly in my lap. "For years," he continued, "I allowed doubt to live in my heart instead of truth. And the person who planted that doubt was my own sister. The room exploded into whispers. Marlene wasn't there, she hadn't been invited. Daniel had made sure of that. I felt tears slide down my face, not because the truth was finally spoken, but because of everything it took from me before it arrived. Years of quiet pain. Years of proving myself to a man I loved. Years of swallowing my hurt for the sake of peace. Daniel turned toward me then, fully, openly. "Priscilia," he said, his voice breaking, "you gave me 43 years of loyalty, patience, and love. You chose peace when I gave you suspicion. I am sorry." He stepped down from the podium and stood in front of me. In that moment, the room disappeared. All I saw was the man I married, and the man who finally saw me again. I stood up slowly. My legs felt weak, but my voice was steady. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said. "But forgiveness didn't erase the damage. We healed, yes, but we healed quietly with scars no one saw." Daniel nodded through tears. "I know, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring the woman I almost lost." That night, something heavy finally lifted from my chest. Later, when we got home, we sat together in the living room like we used to when we were young. No television, no distractions, just truth. Daniel told me everything. How Marlene had admitted to creating fake concerns, how she twisted moments into stories, how she confessed she felt replaced when he married me, and instead of dealing with her feelings, she chose manipulation. "She said she didn't think it would go this far," Daniel said quietly. I shook my head. It always goes far when lies are involved. That was the night I set my final boundary. "I don't want her in my life anymore," I said calmly, not out of hatred but out of self-respect. Daniel agreed without hesitation. That decision brought peace I didn't know I was missing. In the weeks that followed, we talked more than we had in years. We even went to counseling, not because our marriage was broken, but because we wanted it strong. I realized something powerful during that season of healing. Love alone doesn't sustain a marriage, wisdom does. And those 7 lessons my grandmother taught me, they carried me through it all. Peace starts with self-awareness. Choose your battles wisely. Communication beats silence. Respect is non-negotiable. Don't carry the marriage alone. Protect your inner peace. Love is a daily decision. I lived every one of them. Now at 65, when younger women ask me the secret to a peaceful marriage, I don't tell them to endure pain quietly. I tell them this. Choose peace, but never at the cost of your truth. Love deeply, but set boundaries boldly. Forgive, but don't ignore patterns. And never let anyone make you doubt your worth. Marriage can be beautiful, but only when both people and everyone around them respect its boundaries. If you are listening to this and you feel unseen, unheard, or doubted, let me say this clearly. Your peace matters. And before we end, I want to ask you, have you ever experienced betrayal from someone close to you? How did you heal, or are you still healing? Share your story in the comments. You never know who needs to hear it today.